having my own identity, which is separate, has always been very, very important. And also, as I was coming out of that dark tunnel, so to say, I think this realization helped that unless I take charge of myself, of my life, I won't be able to bring up my kids the way I want to bring them up.
Listeners, my name is Mridvika and this is Just an Ordinary Mom podcast. I really am just an ordinary mom to twin boys with a high-speed career, and this podcast is to tell the stories of ordinary moms doing extraordinary things. On the show today, I speak to Neha Jain, who is a storyteller, a film producer, a film festival programmer, and a mother to twin girls. Neha holds an economics honors degree from Delhi University and a postgrad degree in journalism from Sophia College in Mumbai. She's had a defining career at CNBC Awaaz and then LXL Ideas. Her work in the media over the last decade has been focused on kids and young adult content, in a hope to bring them cinematic, visual, and audio stories from all over the world that will make them think, make them ask questions, and also provide answers. She grew up in a joint family listening to stories of her paternal grandmom, who was a finance minister of Haryana in the 70s, and who also set the bar really high for women in the family could and should achieve in their lives. In a candid conversation today, Neha talks about being a trailblazer for women when she chose an unconventional media career in the 90s. She also talks about how difficult it was to decide to become a mother when the biological clock was at odds with everything she wanted to achieve in life. Neha, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Neha, I want to start by talking a little bit about your family because, our early years can have a lot of impact on our adult lives. So I want to start knowing a little bit about where you were born and what kind of family you had. And just tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I grew up in Delhi and I grew up in a joint family. So it was always a lot of fun. And I also come from a family of sort of very strong women who were always brought up knowing that we have to be financially independent. There were no two things about that you can't have a career. There's always that you have to have a career. We have to be financially independent. Education is very important, whether you're a girl or a boy. Thankfully, and I was lucky enough that I didn't have to fight for it. And that awareness that actually there are girls and women who have to fight to be financially independent, that awareness only came a little later. So my paternal grandmother, she was a lawyer and a politician. She was the finance minister of Haryana in the 70s. My grandfather was a doctor. From my mom's side, my grandmother was a teacher and she became a school principal in the later years. My aunts have been doctors and lawyers and teachers. So it's, as I said, inculcated in us to sort of study, to work hard and have a career. But it was also very strongly said that you also have to have a life, you have to get married and you have to have kids. And yes, you have to sort of juggle and balance and be this perfect mother, perfect wife, perfect career woman, which over the years I've come to learn, I've sort of realized is something that we ask too much of ourselves.
Yeah.
And the world expects too much of us.
I think you remind me that strong women stand on shoulders of other strong women. And so tell me a little bit about your grandmother, late Mrs. Om Prabha Jain. You unfortunately didn't get to spend a lot of time with her, but you said that she was a political leader, finance minister of Haryana. And not just that, she was also a fluent speaker and writer both in English and Hindi. And she wrote very frequently on social, political and economic matters. So in 60s and 70s, when women were still trying to find their place in the society, she pursued art, literature, music as hobbies. Did you grow up listening to those stories of your grandmother? And what did it sort of portray for you as what the role of a woman in a society could be like?
Done your research well, Mridvika. So yes, unfortunately, I never met my paternal grandparents. But yes, I grew up listening to many stories. Me and my cousins, my brother, we still bug our aunts and uncles and my dad to tell us more stories. My grandmom was a great lady. There's still a school and a college in her name in Kethal. And I remember when I was small, sometimes we used to be invited to the Founders' Day celebrations. As a little girl, I'm standing and just listening to these people sort of talking about her. I know that she felt strongly about education for girls. And that's why the school and the college were some of the things that she had started in Kethal. And just knowing that, yes, there was someone who, despite the times that she lived in, was able to achieve so much. No one wants to become a politician when they grow up. So I used to actually ask a lot about that, she was a politician. But everyone who knew her would always talk about how humble she was and how strongly she had certain views, but it was always done with a lot of humbleness and being nice and with a lot of humility and grace. My mother has been a homemaker most of her life, but she always wanted to be a doctor before she got married. And those were circumstances that at her age, the time that she was living in, she couldn't avoid. But over the time, as I was growing up, I know she always had that fire of doing something more. She tried to start her own boutique. She even had her own garment export house, and which she ran very successfully for a few years. I saw her struggle very hard and work very hard also. So there have been these phases when she's tried to do something. Even now, she's 64. And yesterday, my parents were going around Noida looking for pottery classes for her because she wants to learn pottery.
Amazing.
It's incredible how for her also, while she's been a homemaker and she's been happily doing that job and she loves her job, and there's so much that I've learned from her in that, she's also had this fire, and I'm glad that it's still not quenched. During the lockdown, she tried to start a little business. She did actually run it for a few months, where she was making this homemade laddus and sort of, and my brother and my sister-in-law and my dad, everyone in the family sort of got together to help market it, and they made these the whole design for her thing and put it on Instagram and stuff, and she was very kicked about that. So I see that fire in her, and and I hope to sort of pass it on to my kids as well.
You said she wanted to be a doctor, but circumstances were such that she had to choose family caregiving over that desire of hers. How did your mom not getting the opportunity to pursue her own dream manifest for you as to what you would choose for yourself to, make up for your mom's unfulfilled ambition with respect to the career?
So actually, it's interesting that you ask this because I have never thought of it like that. But yes, I'm sure there is something there probably, because I've always been extremely passionate about my career, about whatever I do in life. And it's always been an understanding that I'm going to keep working outside the home. I have to earn my own money. And yes, I guess now that you say it, it sort of stems from what I've seen my mom go through also. And she would say that you have to be financially independent. See, I don't have my own money. And it's not like my dad or me or my brother, anyone's ever told her that you can't do this or whatever. But for her, it's always been a matter of pride that I don't want to keep asking. And that's something very important for me as well. Even when I took a break from work in the middle, I was trying to freelance and figure out my life and stuff. During that 1 year, I had enough savings and I used my savings, and I didn't ask my partner for money. So I think it's always been a matter of pride for me.
Your parents have been quite ahead of their times. They've encouraged you to pursue taekwondo, when you were young. That led you to earn gold medals in national and international tournaments. They trusted you to explore forests of Kaziranga and Sundarbans all by yourself as a young girl, as a wildlife documentary producer. And then your parents were very, very liberal and supportive, even in 90s. And that to me, I think is more of an exception than a norm. Despite all of these opportunities, did you feel gender roles play out at home? For example, your sibling being treated differently for chores, whereas your mom had to pick up a lot of primary caregiving responsibilities as opposed to your father who was working outside the house. Did you see these gender roles play out?
Yeah, I would say yes. So while for our generation, for me, for my cousins, for the female cousins also, it wasn't the boys are getting all the good stuff and we have to do household chores. I think for our generation, for whether it was my aunts or my mother, my dad, my uncles, none of us were doing any household chores in our generation, which I also see the flaw in. But because the focus for all the grown-ups, the focus was that we have to study. So our career came first. So it was always that. But yes, my uncles and my dad, none of them, they don't know household chores. And I never saw them ever stepping into the kitchen to make a cup of chai. And it always came to the women. And while it's not a very traditional family that we grew up in, but yes, it was always the women in charge of the kitchen. One of my aunts was working, but getting her kids tiffin ready or, getting breakfast or lunch or dinner ready, it was always the women's area.
I always find that funny, Neha, because I think our parents' generation trained the girls to say that you can achieve anything and everything in life. and they told us that we could be anything we wanted to. But at the same time, we got this flawed notion of that you can do this, but if you have done everything at home, and the boys went untrained to keep up with the growing ambition, or like, what do you do with women who are wanting to go out and work, and like, what would your role be in keeping up with the ambitions of women that you will choose to be partners with? So
yeah, you've said it beautifully, because that imbalance is so stuck. You see it in the men around you, most of the men. I don't want to generalize, but yes, the focus was on the girls, and yes, you making them feisty, you making them independent, more aware of their rights, everything. But the brother is not being trained to deal with, he's still seeing his father, go to office, come back, read the newspaper while this garam chapati is being served to him. He's still seeing that example, and he's not being talked to about.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big flaw, but these things you can only talk about in retrospect, which is why I feel that while our mothers did a great job and had a great responsibility, of course, in making their daughters career-oriented and sort of independent in whichever way they want to be. But I feel today's young moms have a big responsibility to train the sons.
For sure.
To be respectful, to be able to tolerant, accepting, all of those things.
I want to take a segue into your early career. So you grew up in 80s and 90s, and you came from a family of doctors where both your father and grandfather had established practices. Why did you not choose to go down a traditional career path of taking up medicine and inheriting their practice? What made you pursue economics honors in Delhi University and then journalism in Sophia's College in Bombay?
So while my dad is a doctor, he's also a brilliant writer, and he writes beautifully in Hindi and in English, and he has a great love for the arts. Sorry, I'm digressing a bit, but
it's important. Please go ahead.
But he's got a beautiful voice. Like, while me and my brother were growing up, he used to go to Gandharv to study music. Like, he did 7 years he studied classical music while he was working as a doctor and responsible for a family and stuff. So he was greatly interested in music and theater. So I always also saw that I think if he had been given a choice and didn't have all that responsibility that he had at such a young age on his shoulders, he would have been an artist or a writer or something like that. So I think from the beginning, I think subconsciously it was never expected of me. Like, he never said that you have to be a doctor. That never came from him. And my mom, like, she's the one who actually wanted to be a doctor and couldn't be. So I think with parents like that, it was never ever thrust upon us to follow the family mandate. And I think I was a bit lazy. I saw my cousin work very hard. Till you're 30, you're still studying. Like, when do you stop? And I was like, I can't have that life. I want to enjoy. And that was always a part of the thing for me, that while I was decently good at studies, that I can't just be buried in books. I want to have a life.
Yeah. But economics and journalism, they are two different streams. So tell me, why did you do economics, and then what drew you to journalism?
So if I can go a little further back, the first thing that I was aware of that I wanted to do was advertising when I was in, I think, grade 11, 12. And my parents, my mom especially, didn't want me to enter the media industry. She'd only heard a lot of bad things about it and how it's not safe and secure and things like that. So even then, when I wanted to join advertising, they got me an internship through one of my uncles in one of the big advertising agencies at that time. So 2 months of summer break, I went to the ad agency. I came back feeling that this is not what I want to do, because I thought I'm a creative person. I want to be in the creative side of it. But over there, of course, the client is the king. And that was a big blow to whatever my understanding was. But I still wanted to, as you said, I wanted to do journalism then. But my parents felt was that journalism you can always do after your graduation, but it's good to specialize in one subject so that in case you don't want to do it later. And it was clearly coming from the fact that especially my mother wasn't keen on me joining the media industry. And I think she was secretly hoping that I'll change my mind.
So what was your first job that you took right after college? I think it was with Nat Geo and Discovery. You were in the production crew. Tell me, what did you do as a 21-year-old?
So it was actually with a production house in Delhi. And they used to work a lot with the National Geographic, USA, with Discovery channels, with PSBT, Star World, and used to do a lot of projects for them. I think I was just 21. And one of the first projects at that time that came to them was from National Geographic USA. So the team from Washington, DC, they were going to be coming to India and shoot these wildlife documentaries in the different wildlife national parks. And we were a very small team. So I was in charge for Sundarbans and and the film in Kaziranga. So we were supposed to be line producing for the filmmakers who were going to be coming from National Geographic USA. And line producing is basically you have to figure out everything, like right from the basic research. So they had certain characters in mind, finding those characters, those case studies, to also getting all the permissions. When you're shooting in wildlife sanctuaries, there's a whole lot of permissions that you need to take. So doing all of that, booking tickets, figuring out what the shoot itinerary will be, how will we be traveling, booking cars and getting the right drivers to in Sundarbans, booking the right boat in which we are going to be living, because the idea was to go deep into the mangrove forest. So you have to live on the boat for 7-8 days. So getting the right kind of crew for that and making sure that everything is stocked. And in Assam, in Kaziranga, we were doing a film on elephants. So again, finding the right villages around it where there have been elephant attacks, getting the right case studies. So at that point, I didn't realize it was like it was a part of the job. It seemed very exciting. And so I had to go for a recce, and I was living in Delhi then. So from Delhi, everything had to be done by train, and the internet wasn't such a big thing. So we had the internet, everything wasn't there. So for calling the wildlife ministry in Calcutta, I had to find their landline number and call them. And of course, a lot of back and forth trying to find the right person. For Kaziranga, for instance, they had told us about this book written by this UK-based writer. It was about an elephant hunter. So they wanted that elephant hunter to be the main character in the film from Kaziranga. So finding that guy, and without the internet really, it wasn't that big a thing then. So it was really quite an experience. I really think I really grew up in those 6 months. And the kind of stuff that I learned while filming all of that, it was just amazing. So while booking train tickets, I never done that on my own. And then going all the way alone and meeting this NGO person, and he took me on a boat to this tiger hospital where the tiger victims are, going into villages. And in the night, he said, you stay in the women's ward, and he and his boatman will stay in the men's ward. And the women's ward is like this huge hall with those flickering tube lights and glass windows. And it's straight out of a horror movie. And right before that, he's saying, see, pug marks, tiger, pug marks. Like there was a tiger here 3 hours before. Great. Thank you. Helps a lot.
Wow, that's very adventurous, Neha. You went on to work with CNBC Awaaz and had a defining career there, where you got to travel to Europe, Canada, and so many other parts of the world. Tell me, was travel always a passion for you? And if so, what did you gather from these solo travel all these years?
I think in college, I don't know how it came about, but at some point I decided that I'm going to travel the world. How it'll happen, I don't know. But I was just always interested in sort of meeting new people, new foods, culture. And in CNBC Awaaz, I think I was just there at the right moment. And when the weekend programming started, I jumped at the whole idea of let's do a travel show. And it was a time when my bosses, the seniors, everyone was very enthused about doing a lot of new things. So with my economics background, I entered CNBC. I went to CNBC to become a business journalist. I ended up becoming a weekend programming producer. So I did a lot of shows on travel, on food, environment, art. So yes, travel was one of the main attractions for me while I was at CNBC. And as a producer and as an anchor, I got to travel a lot. And again, as you asked me, it did shape the kind of person that I was, because I really feel that everyone, especially in their younger years, should travel, because that opens your mind like nothing else. It really makes you more tolerant and accepting, I feel, because we're all living in our little, so to say, the frogs in a well. And it's natural also as human beings, the kind of community we create around ourselves. It's the people who are like us, maybe similar backgrounds, a similar financial standing, the kind of people who think like me. So unless you get out of that comfort zone, unless you go out and see the world and how people are living outside, how will you get that tolerance for different cultures, that love for different kinds of people, different ways of life, and that respect that, yes, you might be different from me, but that doesn't make you worse than me or better than me. It's just the way things are. So especially for younger people, at a very young age, I feel travel is one of the most important things.
Got it. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about your kids. So you are a proud mother to 5-year-old twin girls, who are absolutely adorable, by the way. But being a mother was a decision that didn't come naturally to you at the beginning. I think you said until your early 30s, you were still contemplating whether you would embrace motherhood or not. Was it primarily because you were so much in love with your job and didn't think you were ready to take responsibility for another human life?
I think I was just too much in love with my life at that moment. Not just about job. Like everything was going so well. I mean, I had a great life partner, like family-wise, you've got a great set of friends. So it wasn't just one thing, but it was just that I was just very happy with the way things were. Things were moving, and I've never been extremely maternal. So I was like, okay, maybe I don't want to think about it. So that thing kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed till it was reaching a point, because unfortunately there is a biological clock. And at some point, of course, the pressure from the family and, that if it's not now or soon enough, then you might miss the bus. So there was a lot of dilemma. There was a lot of thinking about it. That is this what I want? Because obviously it completely changes your life. And I feel that if any of us, me or my partner, had very strong views about having a child, I think it would have been easier to take that decision. But both of us were, I think, happy sitting on the fence.
Was this something that you and Naveen spoke about openly before you had gotten married? Because I think I can speak for myself that we are not conditioned to have these conversations before getting into a lifetime commitment such as marriage. So did you speak to Naveen about this before you even got into the relationship? And if so, what was his reaction when you shared what you really wanted?
No, actually not. And I don't know if it's about conditioning or it was, I think initially it was just that we are getting married. Even that was a big step, and sort of seeing how things go from there. It was never like I don't want to have kids. But it was not, it was also not that I see my future with this house and 2 children running around. It wasn't that also. I think I've always liked the uncertainty and the surprises that sort of come along the way. So I've never been that kind of person to sort of think about how my future would be. So it never became a topic of discussion. But yeah, later on it did. And I think at that point it did come about that I was more nervous about it than he was. And I think his acceptance of it or his wanting to go for it was encouraging for me, that, okay, we both won't do a bad job maybe.
So you eventually did come around, but like you said, that challenge that we face as women is that our ambition and the ticking biological clock are always at odds. So given the complications with late conception, you did choose to go with assisted fertility option like IVF. And I know it's a painful process, both physically and emotionally. More emotionally because society still has stigma around it. But I'm so glad that you've chosen to speak about it openly. And I think IVF plays out differently for different women. But tell me a little bit about your journey. What was the process for you like? And what were some of the changes that you had to bring around in your lifestyle related to your work, your job, your relationship with your partner and things like that?
So I think one of the major reasons that we had to go for IVF was also because I was diagnosed with endometriosis, and which makes conception very difficult. And so I think it was a year of sort of struggles. And so taking that decision to go for IVF wasn't easy. I wasn't really sure if that's how I want to go about it and stuff. But yes, once that decision was taken, it was very stressful. And I was reading a lot about that. And then I realized how many, couples, to have a baby, the kind of trauma that they have to go through, the kind of stress that they put themselves through it. And I think reading about that sort of also helped me realize that I'm not alone, And I feel that always helps when you're going through a traumatic experience like that. And the whole process is not easy, I would say. It took a toll on me. It took a toll on us, as a couple. And I think when we were going through even the first cycle, I had sort of decided that I'm not going to try it again, and that, this is we're going to do it once. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, we'll go back to our life. It's not going to be the same life because over these last few months, we're not the same people as before. But it's definitely not worth putting ourselves, and especially me, myself, through it every time. So that was something that we had come to peace with. I was okay with not having a child, also not being a mom also. And the other thought was also that maybe at a later stage, if we want to go for adoption, maybe we could do that also. So that was the sort of mind space at that time. In terms of work and stuff, I was still because I used to have a job then, I had to leave at 8 o'clock. I would do whatever, those injections and stuff before that, wake up early, do that, and then go to work. So at that point of time, there were no changes in terms of like work life or anything. But yes, as you said, like because you're going through a certain treatment, you need to sort of like in terms of eating healthy, exercising, taking more care of yourself. Those kind of things were there.
Yeah. I think it's also important to touch on the realness of motherhood, right? And not just talk about how magical and life-changing it is. And you've been open about that as well, right? Like, what were the first few days like? Were you immediately maternal and created that bond with your daughters, or did it take its own time for you? And did postpartum play any role in the days that followed after you delivered?
So now that I look back to see what that time was, that yes, it did. I mean, I think I was going through postpartum. I knew about it. You know, that's the thing. Like, you've read about it, you're very aware. But when I was going through it, I did not know what to do. So I think the first 3-4 months, or at least the first 3 months, definitely, it wasn't easy. I mean, the moment both the babies came to me in the hospital, you know, so first it was the relief that everything's gone fine.
Yeah.
You know, it's happened. But the moment they were put in my arms, it was also the feeling that suddenly I'm responsible for these 2 lives. And, you know, like that was a feeling that suddenly like made my heart heavy. It made me super emotional and just made me feel like, what have I done? Am I up to it? What are we going to do? You know? So I think that was one of the first thoughts that I still remember. So the first 3 months sort of just went by in just getting settled in. It took quite time. And now also, if I look at it, constantly feels to me like I'm coming out of a dark tunnel. It's gotten better, of course, over time. The babies turned 4 months old and I got back to my work. Of course, not physically going. It was like a work from home arrangement and lesser number of hours. But that really pulled me out of just all day thinking about nappies and diapers and feeding time and feeding schedule. And that really, at least for me, helped diverting my mind and thinking about other things.
I think you said something the other day when we were speaking about only a happy mother can have happy kids, right? And I fully endorse that thought. So I want to understand, how have you found your me time and how have you kept yourself as a happy person so that you can be a happy and a fully present mother for them?
I strongly feel that, especially babies, they take in a lot from their mother and not what the mother's saying or not what the mother is feeding to them physically, but just her moods, you know, and her thoughts. I don't know, that's just something I felt constantly when my babies were around me, that they could sense my moods. And if I was super stressed, I saw them being stressed or see a bit of it somewhere. That kind of stayed with me from those initial months. And it sort of made me feel, and which now I also believe even more fervently in, that unless I'm happy, I'm content, my children won't be like that or won't have that positivity in them if I'm not happy and content. And I've always believed that a mother is not just a mother. I'm an individual, I'm a person, I'm a woman. I play, of course, many, many roles. Motherhood is one of those, and it's a very important role at that. But having my own identity, which is separate, has always been very, very important. And also, as I was coming out of that dark tunnel, so to say, I think this realization helped, that unless I take charge of myself, of my life, I won't be able to bring up my kids the way I want to bring them up. And I felt that a part of it was connected to who I was as a person and who they see as their mother. And which is also the reason why I think giving myself space, taking my space, sometimes I literally have to snatch that space. But keeping that space for myself, keeping some time for myself for things that I want to do. It could be even exercise, or it could be something like going out with friends, or a night out with friends, or it could be taking a holiday with just me and my husband, or with another friend, or me doing a course, studying something new. So that's what the thought has been, that unless I'm able to do it, my kids won't see that. And I want them to feel that, yes, they are my daughters right now, but they're going to be so much more when they grow up, as they grow up. And to figure that out, they're going to have to see strong role models, you know. I feel that as a responsibility also, that it's a responsibility that I have to be nice to myself and kind to myself if I want my daughters to grow up into adults that everyone would admire and respect.
Totally. You've been someone that has never worked for title or position and always wanted to create impact, find purpose in what you do and meaning in your work. You started freelancing as a producer after your CNBC stint, and then you started creating content for school cinema. What is school cinema and what do you curate, create? What is this international content that you bring to kids and teenagers?
One of the things, yes, I've always been told is that I'll never make pots of money because I'm only always working in what I'm passionate about and what really interests me. The great thing after CNBC was that luckily for me, I found my passion, something that I wanted to focus on, and that was children's content. So school cinema was one of those projects, which is basically a values and life skills based program, which is taught through the medium of cinema. And because our kids are very sort of audio-visual focused, right? And through the medium of sound and visual, the kind of stories you can tell, the opportunity that you have is immense. So if you are able to actually show beautiful stories to children, meaningful stories that teach them about being good human beings, being great global citizens of the world, I feel that can create a lot more impact and long-lasting impact than anything else. So that's what school cinema is about, through short film and a very sort of interactive worksheets. The idea is to sort of teach values, talk about life skills with school-going students.
And now you founded Trampoline Media with a former colleague of yours. What do you do at Trampoline Media, and how do you bring cinematic, visual, and audio stories from all over the world to the young minds of India and South Asia?
We're still very new, but last year with another friend and colleague, we started Trampoline. And the idea is to take the work that I had been doing for the last decade in children's content to sort of take that forward. The idea is to talk to children, talk to teenagers, parents, educators through cinema, through films, through web series, through podcasts about stuff that matters to them, to bring interesting stories. So whether it's about creating our own content or bringing content from outside. So I've also been curating some great films from all over the world for the International Kids Film Festival that I was running for 4 years. And last year we did another big project for one of the governments in the Middle East, again bringing cinema to children over there. So whether it's creating our own content, bringing meaningful and diverse content to Indian kids from outside, these are the two main objectives for us. And alongside using cinema, using the audiovisual medium to be able to teach. So we also did a few workshops around Rajasthan in schools and colleges by showing a lovely French film and talking about that. And that particular film was on body image and the influence of media and stuff. And we created these workshops around that. And that was a great experience. So in whichever way, using films in more ways than one. I think that's one of the main ideas for us. And yeah, we've been going strong for the last 1 year. We took out a podcast, which I think you heard that the other day. So where we've been talking to teenagers across the country and coming from diverse backgrounds, from villages to big metro cities.
Where can the listeners find this podcast?
The podcast is called Indian Teens Unfiltered, and it's available everywhere from Spotify to Google Podcasts, Anchor, Stitcher, even on YouTube if you search for it. The idea is to give an outlet to teenagers to talk about things that matter to them.
Neha, your career has been nothing but inspiring, from media to journalism to now creating meaningful content for young minds of our country and beyond. What is that one piece of advice that you think you would want to give to another woman who wants to have a career and wants to feel that she's a reasonably successful mother if she chooses to be one?
I would say don't feel guilty. I think that's one of our biggest enemies as mothers. And just the whole idea of being a perfect mother, please shelve it. Even if the world screams it out to you. I hate those ads where they say, oh, super mom and oh, look, the superwoman and all of that. I say, please put it back on the shelf. Don't think about it, because no one is a super mom. No one is a superwoman. Just be you, do your thing, and keep that guilt out. It's not easy, of course, but if we try to be nice and kind to ourselves for starters, I think the world will be a happier place.
Thank you, Neha.
Thanks a lot, Mridvika. Loved being here.
Thank you. And that was the episode of Just an Ordinary Mom podcast. If you're an ordinary mom or know someone who could benefit from listening to this podcast, do share it with them. This podcast was recorded at Manic Pod Studio in Chembur. Our sound engineer is Shrey Tiwari and our producer is Vedant Nayak. Thank you for listening.